Hello, I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. And today I'm honored and humbled to be with my good friend Ken Graham from Abilene, Texas. And as you'll find out, Ken and I have a very similar story, unfortunately. But this situation him and I have been dealt has actually put us into an area where our purpose has become driven by passion, and Ken has now been asked to work with us on the Living Undeterred project. So we'll talk about that as well. But Ken, I want to welcome you to the show, and again, you and I are part members of a club we didn't ask to join, and certainly a club we can never leave. But it's definitely something that doesn't have to define us negatively. But with that, thank you, Ken, for being here, and I look forward to having this conversation with you.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
So you're in Abilene, Texas, and as you well know now that you're part of the Living Undeterred tour, we'll be stopping in Texas, and in Texas, I know throughout the whole country we have this mental health initiative that we're trying to work on, but I have to think that the people in Texas are no different than the people in Iowa, and that we're all in a big boat together and trying to navigate through whatever personal struggles that we have.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone's safe from, what ended up
Hmm.
killing my son and, and yours and so many others. And we're seeing a lot about it. It's talked about almost every night on the news, but it's the fentanyl crisis, and that's what came up in my son's toxicology. He was 25 years old, and it's heartbreaking
Hmm.
because once it happens to you, you start paying attention. We've talked about that. And
Hmm.
so now I'm on all these sites and, kind of be supportive, but it is just devastating to see the numbers of people that are posting, parents, day after day after
Hmm.
day. They're right back where we were when it happened to us. And it's day one for them. And it's a large number. I mean, it's close to 300 a day now, opiate related, and
Yeah, and that's
more
just
than
so.
50% of them are fentanyl related.
Yeah, I mean, certainly something has to be done, and I think you and I are convinced that awareness is the first step, but it's certainly not the last step. We're not going to change the narrative by just being more aware. It's pretty clear in many areas of our lives that awareness isn't going to fix everything. We have to have actionable plans. We have to have ways to initiate and implement these plans. So we can talk a little bit about, as you and I go through the podcast today, just about, what are your thoughts on harm reduction? What are your thoughts on, ways that we can start to get these narratives to change. Now, you and I both know that the new shift in the fentanyl poisoning crisis or epidemic isn't the addicted and the users that are dying. It's the many times often it's the 13-year-old doing Percocet at a party that doesn't really even know what Percocet is. They're not even trying to get high, and that's kind of the new shift right now. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your son? Tell us what he was like. You know, kind of how I know people that follow our story know that Seth was prescribed Adderall, and from there it went to abuse and exploration of other drugs, and then ultimately was heroin with fentanyl. But let's talk about your son for a moment.
Okay.
If give us a little background about who he was, and we can talk about him a little bit.
Before I lose my train of thought, I do want to speak to something you just said, though. Um,
Hmm.
and this it's not talked about enough, I don't think. But kids or adults should not take medicine they're not prescribed. We all know that.
Right.
But these kids are
Right.
making what they think is a safe choice, a safer choice, because how many people have kids, have broken a leg or got stitches or had anxiety, been put on medicine, almost every kid growing up has had pain medicine before. And they know what it feels
Right.
like and they know what it's done. A lot of these older kids, I say a little older, borderline adults, 17, 18, 19. They have some emotional issues. They're stressed, and a lot of those are being prescribed Xanax at a really young age. My son was prescribed Xanax. He was also prescribed Zoloft.
How old?
He was prescribed Zoloft before when he was 17.
17.
Yeah, and he was prescribed Xanax. I didn't even know about that. That was in the last year of his life. So when
Hmm.
these we see all these people dying, I think it's easy for a lot of people, again, because it hasn't touched them. It's not personal yet. It's very easy to say, "Oh, you shouldn't take that pill." Well, I agree with that, but they shouldn't die either from taking a counterfeit pill that's been pressed in Mexico and comes through the borders, and they're being sold or handed out. These kids are being poisoned. It's they call them overdoses still. That's changing a little bit, but they definitely don't deserve to die.
Yeah, and again, part of what my quest is to figure out. I think I know like why people go down these roads, but I think if we can get to kids before they get to those moments when they make those decisions to think that a pill's okay or that vaping's okay, or if we can get to them before them and then expose them to the potential problems, not if they don't die, but actually if you live, the problems associated with being addicted. I think the statistics are being a substance use abuser. The statistics are jaw dropping. It's like 90% of kids that get past the age of 18 without having substance abuse or addiction issues have the rest of their life where they don't have these issues. I mean, some ridiculous number. So it seems to be 18 is like that year that if you can get through 15, 16, 17, 18 and not be drinking heavily and smoking and doing drugs, you probably have a very good probability that this won't follow you the rest of your life. But problem is that the age of first use is 14 in this country, and that's what's scary. When I first saw that statistic, I thought, wow, that's like seventh, eighth grade. You know, I have neighbor kids
Mm.
around me that are in fourth and fifth grade. They're right there.
Yeah,
They're
we call them all kids.
yeah,
They're really kids.
yeah,
Yeah, they are kids.
right. And they shouldn't be thinking about these things. I know you and I weren't at that age. We were we were doing other things that probably weren't the most constructive, but we weren't dying. That's the whole different thing
Yeah.
today than when you and I grew up. We could do these things and we could have a fun time, but we got up and went to school and went to college and got married and had kids, and I mean we didn't die. Today it's just lights out.
Parents are finding their children dead. 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 25-year-olds, they die in their sleep
Hmm.
because they're not necessarily out partying. They take something they think is pharma safe. They shouldn't take it, but
Hmm.
they do, and it kills them. In my case, my second to oldest son found his brother, and that is I would do anything to change that because I know in my head the movie that keeps playing. I can't imagine what he's seeing every
So
day,
Tyler passed away, you
remembering
said,
that.
at 25.
At 25, he turned 25 June 2nd, and he died July 4th.
And if I remember right from our conversations, he was pretty successful in the career that he was doing, and from the outside looked like everything was okay. Now, was he battling substance abuse and addiction issues as well?
um, that's I've been thinking a lot about that, knowing we were going to do this podcast, and I certainly have feelings I should have and could have done more, but at the time that he died, he was on top of the
Hmm.
world. I mean, had the job making
Yeah.
extremely good living for a 25-year-old. Had a new car, had the girlfriend. I mean, he loved his job. The people there loved him. They used to call me. because I knew a lot of those people, and say, this kid, he's going to be better than you. And I said, well, that's good. I hope he is, because, uh,
Right.
but there was a time when he was at a younger age, 15, no, 16, 16, 17. You know, a lot of kids experiment with pot and stuff like that. And he did that. And I was extremely hard on him, probably overreacted to it. Um, and it, within about a year, he ended up, his mother and I are divorced. He was living with me.
Hmm.
Within a year or so of that happening, I was on him. I said, it's not going to happen on my watch. I'm not going to let something happen to you. You're not going to stay out
Yeah.
all night. You're going to check in with me. And I feel like I overreacted. But he ended up moving out as soon as he could. Uh, went back to
Okay.
live with his mother. But yeah, he did. He was doing some things, but I never thought it was that serious. And when you would see him, he never ever looked messed up. I could call him anytime. He never sounded like he was under
Yeah.
the influence. I worked with him for about 2 years. Him and I worked together. We're in the car together all day, every day. Best, the coolest guy in the world to hang out with and talk to. I mean, just super smart. I mean, he had his head on right, and you know, sometimes these young folks think they got things. They think they have these things under control, and they are
Yeah.
so good at hiding it. And we don't want to think anything of it either. We don't want to believe there's something going on, and then you get a phone call like I did, and it's your son saying, "Dad, I can't wake Tyler up." And then
Sometimes,
everything, when that happens, buddy, it's you take a look at, like your book says, you got to make some choices pretty quick.
yeah, it slaps you in the face. I mean, you and I both went through that self self check after we found out that Tyler and Seth died. You go through the what could I have done checklist, where were the signs, and you just feel like a fish out of water. And one of the reasons why you and I are doing what we're doing is to give other parents some guidance. God forbid that they have to go through what we did, but there's more that don't die that die that deal with these problems every day. So out of the 300 a day that die, there's 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 that didn't die, but the collateral damage in the families are still there. The fractured relationships, the lying, the deceit, the stealing, the incarcerations. I mean, all those things are there. And so there's actually, more people hurting that didn't have their children die. Because you and I was in tremendous amount of pain and suffering before Seth died, just feeling like I let him down as a dad. What could I have done at 7 years old? What could I have done differently at 8, 9, 10, 11? Before he died, I was already kicking myself that there was things I didn't do. Was I too hard on him? Was I too lax on him? Was I not aware? I was drinking I was a drunk myself. So was my drinking interfering? He would come home and my wife and I'd be on the couch drinking wine. What good a role model was I then? So yeah, it's very normal for adults, for parents to do that self checklist. And I finally realized, Ken, and I know you do too. I hope you do. You finally realize that at the end of the day, there really wasn't a lot more you and I could have done. Um, I think the outcome, I speak on Seth's behalf, the outcome was pretty much in stone. I mean, it was jail or death. When you're doing the things he was doing for that long, you're not just going to wake up and be a college graduate. It just doesn't happen. So it was fairly certain that was going to happen. Now, in Tyler's case, it doesn't sound like that his road was, leading to an ending like ours was. But here we are, two dads that, our pain is very similar, but it's been different, a little bit different journeys. But So,
The,
talking about your coping strategies, Ken, what do you do daily? People that follow my story know what I do and I write about in the book. But what are some of the things you do for your coping?
um, well, a lot of it is staying immersed in what we're doing today. I do a lot of talking with parents who have had the same thing happen. Um, I try to stay really busy, uh, but when this happens, if it happens to you, at least in my case, it's like immediately there, there's a chemical change in your brain as far as what matters
Hmm.
at this point. What really matters.
Hmm.
And I got to tell you, I am not the best role model for how I coped with it for the first 4 or 5 months. I didn't drink, I didn't do anything like that, but I was just in a I was in I felt sadness that I've never felt before. It was overwhelming, and I just
Hmm.
you see your kids as the baby. You play the movies in your head
Yeah.
when you lay down to go to bed. When
Yep.
you wake up, you walk through the house, you see a picture of them, and it's man, it's a fight, and you got to make decisions um, that you have. In my case, I have four other boys, so I got to. I
Yeah.
don't feel like it, and I don't want to, but I got to get up and get going and call them and text them and say what's going on, how you doing, because that's my job. I
And
mean,
take care of yourself at the same time.
yeah, but it's easy. It's easy to just go away. It's easy to just shut down. It's the easiest. I would say that's the easiest path, whether it's drinking, doing whatever. But the easiest thing in the world is to just shut down, kind of isolate, and just go away because that's what you feel like you want to do. At least I did. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to see anybody.
Yeah.
I was a wreck. I'm still a wreck. I'm just
Yeah.
managing it better. Uh, and I got to tell you, I'm taking medication too because um, I
Hmm.
couldn't manage the emotions on my own. Um, so I think
Right.
that's important for people to know too. Don't worry about what anybody thinks about that. If you can't get through an hour or a day or be productive without falling apart, go talk to your doctor. And
Yeah.
it's
That's a
it's
great.
helped me.
I'm happy you. I'm happy you added that last part, Ken, because I think there's are stigmas with those that are addicted, and there's stigmas with how you should grieve. And people think that there's a correct way to grieve, and there really isn't. There's only your way to grieve. And grief itself is a process. It's not an event. It's not a day where you just grieve. You mean it's you and I will be by definition grieving till our last breath. But that grief doesn't have to define us negatively. And that's probably where maybe you and I are cut from a little bit different cloth than a lot of people that have had happened to them, is that they've used those events to define them negatively. And I'm not saying that I've got this conquered or I've got this, got this beat, because I daily I have to go through my therapy that I do, my meditation, reading, doing podcasts, meeting people, and now the tour. But if I stopped doing that, or if I was taking medicine, if I stopped that without the doctor, being aware, you run the risk then of falling back into the abyss. And that's an important part of the process with grieving and therapy is grieving and recovery, I guess, or trauma, is no shortcuts ever. Whatever you figure out works for you, stick to it, because it doesn't matter if it works for me or somebody else. It has to be it works for you.
Yeah, it it's when it happens, regardless of how tight knit your family is, and I had a lot of support. My sister, my mom,
Hmm.
nieces, nephews, um, a men's ministry I'm part of, Iron Man. Though I mean, though these I have a circle that these people, circle the wagons. But it's an alone. It's a very lonely heartache. You're going to take inventory of yourself. I'm 52, and the older you get, the better we know ourselves. Hopefully, but this is next level, knowing what you're made of, what you're capable of. Where you came from. Now, what are you going to do? Like you talk about in the book, it's decision time. What are you going to do about it? Um, how are you going to lead by? In my
Well,
case,
this.
what really helps me the most, and all my children are boys, so that's what really
Hmm.
keeps
Yeah,
me.
me too.
It keeps me focused because I know they're going to have. I mean, they've had this happen. That shouldn't happen. That they shouldn't have had this trauma, but they did. But they're
Hmm.
watching me deal with something this
Hmm.
bad, and they're learning from me. How what do you do when this happens? What is when they're going to know it, when they're older and they have kids and grandkids. Maybe some of the things I did and the way I responded, and maybe it's going to help them.
Do you think, in a way, it can be a competitive advantage for the boys as they get older that they've had this event happen to them,
Yeah, I hate to say that.
and
Yeah,
they're,
that I agree with you.
I
I
do
hate to
too.
say that, but it is.
Yeah.
It is because life's kind of about pain management. We got to deal with
Hmm.
it, and resiliency is what separates one person from another. How you're going to take the hits, how quickly do you recover and bounce back and keep going? Because a lot of
Hmm.
times the hits come, and that's the excuse we needed to start drinking again, to start
Yeah.
partying again, to
Yeah.
quit the job, to you know not speaking for all men, but a lot of men, we're one mistake away from blowing everything. Uh, so I don't know. It we They're better prepared. Back to the point that you were at. Yeah, they're better prepared to deal with tragedy, and I mean, I don't know what else could hurt them more. Uh,
Right.
Maybe the death of a parent, or I don't know, but they've definitely been tested, and man, my
Well,
boys are
I'll
really
jump in
doing.
there
They're doing
because I
well.
feel fairly qualified to comment on what you just said because obviously their mom died. Roman and Ian, my wife died in June. So they not only lost their older brother, which normally you look up to your older brother, in which they did, but then they lost their mom. So, by 19 and 17, they don't only have to dealt with sibling bereavement, which is harder to get over. That's the number one thing for an adolescent to deal with is the death of a brother or sister. That's what some of the studies have said, even
Yeah,
more than a parent.
most traumatic.
Um, and then they lose in a short amount of time. Then they lose their mom on top of it. And so now my boys are 20 and 18. And you're right. I have to tell them there's only really, they say there's two roads metaphorically, Ken, but I personally, I think there's one road. The other road just sucks. The other road is not a road you want to be on. That's the bitter road. That's the misery road, the alcoholism road. That's just the road that leads to death. But so for me, there's just the better road. There's just the road of motivation, inspiration, and taking care of yourself and leading in what I call an intentional life. And I told the boys, I said, what happens if I die? I mean, statistically, and being a male at 55, there's a chance I could die. How would you guys take it if you lost your brother, your mom, and your dad? Well, I would tell you right now if that did happen, you know how I would react if you went down the bitter road. I would haunt you. I'd want you to find a way to turn my death into something positive. And that's an odd, really odd way for a dad to talk to their sons after they have lost two people. But I'm a pragmatic person. I'm a realist, and um, we all die. And I think the fact that we are in denial our whole lives, and when death happens, we're just shocked. But it doesn't go in the right order all the time. It's supposed to be great grandparents, grandparents, parents, maybe a spouse, never a child. You know, you and I, it's in the opposite order. And it doesn't make it any less painful or more painful. It just is odd that that's the way for us it turned out. But it's certain, we can choose our suffering. I mean, Ken, you and I can sit around and we can choose to get involved in charity and foundations and raise money and talk about Tyler and Seth and cry and laugh, and we can do that, and we should do that. That's the healthiest way for you and I to move on. And every other parent that's lost a child, doesn't have to be overdose, doesn't have to be suicide, could be car accident, could be anything. Um, you got to kind of look at things as like, do things happen for you? Is this an opportunity for you to be a better man? And I know you and I have kind of, and I had my down times too. You said 4 or 5 months, but I know it's probably been longer. Mine was like 13 months, right? Went straight downhill after Seth died. And then something kind of clicked. But, you know, with you now being on the tour, and you're going to be, and you already have been talking to people around the country, isn't it awe-inspiring to talk to other people that have had similar things happen? I know for me, I derive a lot of power from that, but it also can be very toxic. It can be very taxing, I guess, where it can kind of pull you down if you're not careful. Would you agree?
I do. It pulls you back in for sure,
Right.
especially when we're on these pages um, and you see these pictures of these just beautiful,
Yeah.
20-year-old
It's hard.
young men, young women.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to see it because every time you feel it again, but it doesn't work to try to put it out of your mind that it didn't happen either, because that's what I did the first 3 or 4 months,
Right.
because I couldn't even look at the picture on the wall without just falling apart.
Yeah.
And I felt
Me
so
too.
guilty about that because I'm trying to put him out of my mind because it's hurting too bad, but then I'm feeling like I'm
Hmm.
cheating on him or something. It's a it's a
Yep.
weird
I
thing,
can relate. Yeah.
and
Yep.
I can tell you it's a process, takes a while. But for me, the only thing that gets me back in the game, got my head on straight. I'm ready to do business. I'm ready to help out with the tour. I've got a
Hmm.
new company I'm working on putting together. Is just recognize that's part of who I am now, and um, I have to get better from it. I don't have. What's the other option? You don't really have one if you're going to go forward. You got to figure out a way to help other people. It's hard. It does bring you back. It's I'll cry when I talk to other folks because I can
Hmm.
feel what they're feeling, but it's the only thing
Hmm.
that helps me. It's the only thing when I get up in the morning, I want to do something to help somebody else that is feeling what I felt or is feeling what I feel now. And I've been in business. I've been an automotive operations guy for 30 plus years. Um,
Right.
I've always liked people, wanted to help people, uh, but everything, it's a reset. It's definitely a mental reset, like I said, about what's important. And I wake up
Hmm.
and my priorities are totally different now.
There's something about, and we talk about this on every show pretty much because we kind of gravitate to it, but there's something about the beauty of vulnerability and being able to, especially men, because we do a pretty crappy job of releasing our emotions in front of other humans. We do it alone, in the bathroom, whatever, we're crying. But to do it, grown men to do it in front of other people, I think is very courageous. And I admire a man that can, you know, can do that with dignity, and you can cry with confidence. You don't Crying is not a sign of weakness at all. And I think if more men learned, I bet you, and I can only speak for me, and I'm sure you would agree, I've had at least two really hard, good cries today. Two were in my office with my two business partners, talking about my transition out of the company and stuff, and selling my some of my shares and stuff, and I just lost it. I mean, just tears rolling down my face. Then the other one was earlier this morning. So I had two when I was watching Brighton Sleep when I made that post. Two really powerful emotional moments for me. One involved me crying in front of two other grown men. And I have to think, if I watched a grown man cry, and I never cried in front of people, I'd have to watch that person and think, wow, maybe I need to do this more often. Maybe I need to release and cleanse my soul, I guess. So I encourage men to allow themselves to be human, and not be an emotional cyborg where they're just holding everything in, because there's so much evidence that that's so destructive. I highly doubt you could find any scientific literature that says it's healthy to repress your feelings. I mean, but
Right.
with men, we do that because of shame and stigma, and it's promoted as a sign of weakness. But I was curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it all depends on how you were raised. What was your father figure like? What did you see? I think that's got a whole lot to do with it. But at our age, um, men, your men aren't supposed to cry. We're not. We're supposed to be the
Hmm.
protector, and we're not supposed to show emotion. We're not supposed to need help either. That's why we don't ask for directions if we're
Well, the
out and
suicide
get lost.
suicide rates in middle-aged men, and specifically white middle-aged men, were the highest increase year over year, not numbers wise, but percent wise, year over year than any other area of the uh, suicide issues, was white middle aged men. So basically, you and me. And I'm not
2020.
saying that we have anything worse. I'm just saying a lot of white middle aged men in America are giving up. And they're looking at taking their own life as the only option. Like there's no other options. And I can certainly I can certainly relate to that, but so could many other people that male, female, different colors that could also say that as well. So I'm not trying to be a victim. I'm not victim. I'm simply repeating a statistic I saw. So anyone listening, don't shoot the messenger. But if you
Is
dig
that
deep enough, you can find statistics to support any narrative. But the reality is that there's a lot of with COVID, and a lot of men losing their jobs, a lot of the pressures we put on ourselves. I wasn't anointed man of the family. It's just something I kind of took my responsibility when I graduated college and met my wife. It's like I wanted to be a provider. It's like that was in my DNA. I can't explain it. That's the way I wanted to be. And when I met my wife, she was okay with that. She did a tremendous job taking care of the kids when I could go work. And for my wife and I, it worked well. For other couples, it would be a disaster, but for us, it worked well. So I grew up in an environment, as you were kind of alluding to, and my kids grew up in an environment, that's different than everybody else. But I don't know. I'm kind of reaching here and trying to figure out how you and I can contribute to move the needle, to make people start realizing that some of the decisions they're making ultimately could be very, very deadly, you know?
Yeah. Well, just because a man is 35 or 40 or 45, that doesn't mean that he's got his life together. And you don't know
Right,
what they don't know either based on what they have or have not ever been exposed to. If you
right.
it's got a lot to do with, I don't want to deviate from our path, but it's got a lot to do with father to father in what
Yeah, I
how
agree.
kids grow up and what they see, what they learn, what their idea of manhood is, what their idea of a good husband is,
Hmm.
what their idea of a good provider is. Because I'm guessing those stats are from 2021. You know,
Could have been.
if you dig into data, data's huge. And then you dig it, and you
Yeah.
peel the onion. There's probably a lot of financial hardship there. You're going to see that show up a whole lot
Yeah.
on some of these people that think about suicide or
I think a lot of men our age can wake up and there's a sense of expectation that they had when they were 20 that they were going to be worth $10 million driving a Ferrari and traveling the world, and they wake up and they're 55 and they're a little overweight, maybe they drink a little too much, their marriage isn't great, their business is okay, but they still have some credit cards and they have a big mortgage, and they probably sit there going, wow, 30 years went by and I should have more. And that is the beginning of the unraveling of a lot of really well-intended people. And again, meditation has really helped me realize that those thoughts come into my head. And now when I have any thoughts like that, like if I have imposter syndrome or if I comparing my podcast to somebody else, I've really learned to just let those type of feelings die quickly and not judging them, but just it's almost like it's almost like I'm stealing someone's thought that's next to me. Like my neighbor's thought popped in my head and I go, "Okay, this isn't my thought. It's going to go away." Kind of like if you accidentally stole someone's Wi-Fi, information, on their home Wi-Fi or whatever. It's almost like I intercepted somebody's thoughts. And again, I've tricked my brain to believe that. So I know it's not true. I couldn't hijack my neighbor's thoughts, and I don't know if I'd want to. My neighbor's great anyway. I'm hoping he watches this. He'd laugh. But the reality is that's how I've kind of got to thinking about destructive thoughts, Ken, is that they're not mine. I don't have to own them. I don't have to own them. I can just say to my own brain, hey, this thought popped in my head. It's going to die. It's going to go away just as fast as it came in. So going back to where I'm going with this is if I get into a depressive state, I see a picture of Seth. I got him right here behind my wife and my son. And I start to invoke these depressive feelings. My brain goes into defensive mode. Okay, Jeff, go to your meditation. These are just thoughts. That picture doesn't have any feeling. I'm putting the feeling into it. Now, again, I'm no scientist, I'm no psychologist, I'm no therapist, but for Jeff Johnston, this little exercise that I've got from meditation has really been a lifesaver for me. So I don't just look at a picture and then that feeling, Ken, overwhelming sadness comes in and hits you like a ton of bricks. And it takes days to get out of it sometimes. And that's clinically what depression is. And
yeah,
I've just kind of figured out one short little tool, and it came by accident from meditation. So I don't know why I shared that story with you, but I thought it's important for people watching this to, just because somebody says you're depressed or whatever, you don't really have to believe it. I mean, you can trick your brain to believe anything. I mean, science has
right,
proven that.
right. But we're talking about men in the family, and the fact that we don't ask for help, and we think we're tougher than we are. I think it's important. I would
Right.
hope that if there's another father out there that sees this podcast and he has something like this happen to him, that it gives him a little bit of an idea of what to expect. I mean, it's like we say, it's a
Mm-hmm.
terrible club to be in. Nobody wants to be a member of this club,
Right.
but I think it's critical to hook up with other like-minded people. Get yourself associated with groups and things like that. That people like us who have we were there, we've been there, and we're
Mm-hmm.
still working on it. And what you're talking about, I call it taking mental inventory, and it's
Mm-hmm.
discipline is what it is. It's discipline. You
Right.
use meditation, and
Right.
that's a high level of discipline because garbage in, garbage out. We have to,
100%.
we've got to
Yep.
work on our head because there's negative. If you're not putting something in to offset all the negative
Yeah.
that we're just exposed to, whether it's television or
Right.
walking around, you're already in
Yep.
trouble. Now,
Right.
we don't realize some of this sometimes until something bad happens. You're better off if you can do
Right.
it before something bad happens. But either way, um, you got to make decisions the minute you open your eyes in the morning that you're going to make it through another day, and you're going to make the best of this day, and you're going to make your son proud of how you handled it. Because my son wouldn't want me to lay around and be depressed and wither away, and
Of course. Yep.
he wouldn't want that. Is at the funeral, at his funeral, one of the things I wrote that I know that if he could come see me, the first thing he would say is, "Dad, I'm sorry,"
Hmm.
because he was a good boy, and he wouldn't want the hurt. It's what's so hard about it. These kids aren't trying to commit suicide. They're not
Hmm.
necessarily, and it bothers me too. There is deep in addiction, long term. In and out of rehab. That's a fight. But in a lot of these cases, like in the case of my son, he's on top of the world. Everything's great, and he's gone the next day.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, but he's it was a good person, and the last thing he would want would be to cause a disruption or uh, make people sad or have me spin off and deteriorate. Which I'm telling you, it's the easiest thing to do.
Oh yeah.
Taking the narrow
Absolutely.
path is the hard way. Um, but you
Right.
got to do it. There's people watching you and counting on you, and have my four boys, wife, my nieces, nephews, sister, mom still around. They're watching me to see, how what do we do? I'm still in the lead role there. So whether you want to be or not, that's where you are. And sometimes you got to man up and go do man stuff.
So before I met you, what type of advocacy, what type of programs were you involved with, if any, at that point? Before, because I just met you a few months ago. So
Um, so I'm part of a men's ministry. I've been part of Iron Man
okay.
Outdoors men's ministry for 7 years, and I'm a pro staffer with them, which means I lead retreats at different places around the country. But we it's men
Hmm.
only, and we cater to men for a reason. Just like you talked about, men won't admit that they need help, but they won't ask for directions. You know how men are. Uh, so we
So
cater to
that's not
them.
just me, huh?
It's so what we do is we put together fishing trips, hunting trips,
Oh,
that kind of
cool,
thing.
cool.
And the people that sign up and come to our retreats, they're signing up for a reason. They're in the process of taking
Right,
a mental inventory. They just aren't telling anybody. And so we talk to them about what's fatherhood for you. What's a good father mean? What's a good husband look like? What was your relationship with
right.
your father? That kind of thing. And it's powerful, powerful stuff. But it was life changing for me. When I first went on a retreat 7 or 8 years ago, I remember the second night saying, "When I get home, I'm going a different direction. I'm not
Hmm.
going home the same guy that got here." And I've
How
spent
many how many guys are in how many guys are in each retreat?
so this coming weekend, I'm leading one here. It's a hog hunting and fishing retreat in Texas,
Oh,
and, and,
cool.
and we have 11. I have 11 people coming.
Hmm.
They're
How many
they're normally about that size,
how
10 or
many
11.
states are you in, or how many different places?
Uh, Kentucky, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina. We're in Florida.
Hmm.
We do we hunt in Texas. We do lots of fishing trips all over. It changes all the time. Um, Georgia, Missouri,
That's such a great idea.
Illinois. I went to Illinois last year, but
Iowa?
it's in. I don't think we have property in Iowa, but you might know somebody that we could go do something. But
Yeah.
I've stayed very involved with that group because again it's personal because I was that guy that responded to an ad for a fishing trip or a hunting trip, and really I wanted to go be around positive men that could maybe help me change what I was doing a little bit. I wanted to be a better dad. The more kids I had, I was all I did was work,
Right.
and I was taught, if you're a provider, that you're doing what you're supposed to do. It's a lot more than that, but I wasn't the best dad for a long time, I'm very thankful
Hmm.
that I did a 180 before it was too late, and I made some pretty major
Mm-hmm.
changes in my life. But
Well, a big one
now
for a lot of people is just,
now I'm in Ironman, and we're getting ready to load up a tour bus,
I know I
your
can't.
tour bus.
I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe we can talk a little bit about the tour. Although I think by the time your show will run, will be pretty much the week of the tour, uh, because I've got quite a few shows teed up already. But yeah, the tour is an interesting experiment. I like to call it in a way. Is it's an exploration, and it's kind of interesting because Antarctic Mike, right? Mike Pierce.
Only recently through you, yes.
Okay. I've known Mike about a year or close to that, and he's going to be on the RV as well for a lot of the trip. And Mike's a keynote speaker. His claim to fame was he was one of the first Americans to run an ultra marathon on the glaciers of Antarctica. And if you see the pictures of him running on a white glacier with the sun beating down, with no trees, no other than knowing the sun, where the sun sets and rises in the morning, you have no direction. I mean, it would just literally drive you insane. When I run on my elliptical, I have to have my phone in front of me and my TV running, and I got to have distraction so I'm not thinking about running. But running on a glacier, just imagine how focused you'd have to be. And Mike trained for 2 years in a freezer, so he's really hyper focused on goals and endurance. And his passion came from his wife that got injured in the 80s. She still deals with injuries, and so he's dealt with, not dealt, but he's had been challenged with not being a caregiver, but basically helping his spouse out that as she fights through some of these physical and emotional challenges she has. But his Mike's claim to fame, or his passion, is the Ernest Shackleton story. And Shackleton is an explorer, British explorer that
I've read the book.
is one of the most
Hmm.
amazing stories in human history. And it's just getting a renaissance, kind of a resurgence now, because they just found his ship, the Endurance,
It's a great
in
book.
like 10,000 feet of. Yeah, and so I've actually seen Mike speak. I know the Shackleton story quite well, but where I'm going with this, Ken, as I called Mike the other day, I just had this thing pop in my head. I said, "Man, you know what? We have to name the RV. We have to come up with a name for the RV." And I'm thinking, what are we gonna name it? And all of a sudden, I had this vision in my mind of that video I saw when that camera came down in the clear water, when the Endurance is laying there on the bottom of the ocean, and you could see the brass, the Endurance on the boat, on the ship. And I thought, okay, there you go. So our RV is going to be the Endurance 2. And the metaphor is, as Shackleton went into the unknown, we're doing that in the mental health space. We're going into the unknown. I mean, I really don't know what to expect. What this is not is a lecture series or a books and tape series where I'm going to be selling motivational things. I mean, that's not what this is. This is a giant science experiment. This is 60 stops over 95 days where you and me and Mike and Ellen and Molly and Anthony, and we can gather data, and then after the tour circle back to people and say, here's what we found out. This is the beauty of connectivity. Johann Hari says in Chasing the Scream, the opposite of addiction is connection. Well, what better connection is there to get an RV and drive around the United States over 95 days? I mean, that's literally going to where the problem is. And sitting behind your computer and writing a blog and liking and sharing and commenting is great for a while. And then if you're like me, you kind of get bored of that. And so this tour is just going to be the most amazing project that I've ever been involved in my entire life. And we're 40, we're not even leaving yet. And I'm already slightly terrified. But I told Mike the other day, and I've told you this too, is that the unknown is what makes it exciting. I talked to one guy early in the planning of the tour, and he was like really hyper focused on, this has to be run like a political candidacy, like you're going around the country campaigning. Do you understand that you have to have this? And it's almost like that person was kind of telling me all the reasons why this wouldn't work. And I'm kind of like thinking to myself, I'm sure Shackleton did too, is like, I'm not comparing myself, trust me, but it's like, I don't want to know the reasons why this won't work. I just want to know the reasons why it can,
Well, yeah, we know it
and
won't
that's how
work if
the
we don't do
mindset
it.
is with this tour, Ken. Right. And I'm doing it. Obviously, we bought the RV. You're on the team. We're committed. And each stop, the 60 stops we have right now, each one of them is an absolutely jaw-dropping, spellbinding, inspirational story in and of itself, that each stop could be a movie. Each stop could be a book. And we've got 60 of these things, plus all the spontaneity that's going to happen, all the strangers coming up that is going to, tell us their stories. And to say I'm excited to go on this is just, I don't know. I'm so excited to get out there and just meet people, and with no agenda. We're not selling anything. I'm selling strength and hope, I guess, but there are a lot of people out there that the timing of this tour couldn't be any better, and there's going to be a lot of people each day that their lives are going to be touched. I know mine will be, and I know yours will be as well. But so, yeah, I'm hoping I can drag you on the RV for a few stops, and we're down south. I mean, I know Texas is our third stage. So we have the red, yellow, and green stages, and we're not in Texas till the green. So we'll have a lot of practice before we come see you.
I'll be around for Virginia. I'll make some.
Oh, sweet.
I'll bring a sleeping bag along. I'll be on the. You'll hear me snoring. I'll be
Well, I
on.
want to go hog hunting sometime with you.
Come on
I
now.
haven't hunted. I hunted pheasants and ducks. That's all I've ever hunted. And I know
Now we're.
hogs can be a pretty. What's that?
I said now we're in my arena. Now we can really talk. You see, look behind me.
Yeah, you'd have a great conversation with my brother Dan. My brother Dan's a national sales rep for St. Croix fishing rods,
You told me that. You
and
told me that.
Dan's one of the top guys in St. Croix, and he does a lot of the fishing with the Al Linders of the world and all the big outdoorsmen. And I call Dan Crocodile Dundee because he can do everything. He can bow hunt, he can rifle, he can fly fish. He's a professional in like 9 different outdoor areas. But yeah, he would you and him could sit around and talk for hours on, and really how therapeutic. Dan and I actually he was on my podcast about a year ago. And we talked about fishing and how fishing is such a great escape, like it is for people who golf. Although maybe golfing is a little more frustrating, but fishing can be frustrating too. But there's this mental release that when you're doing something and getting away from your normal stresses, where fishing and hunting and those things seem to be And maybe it's more for men, I don't know, but seems to be a really good release to get away from the pressures of life, right?
Yeah, it's awesome. Not not shooting animals.
Hmm.
Just especially when it's with your kids or with family, or
Yeah.
it is a good way to kind of clear your mind, get your head straight. But I gotta tell you what I most admire about what you're doing is it is overwhelming when you think about it. Because
Yeah,
I'm a kind of
yeah, it
guy
is.
that'll overthink something like that to the point where 2 years later we're still, it's not perfect yet. You can think yourself out of a lot of stuff. You can overthink a lot of things.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
but there's
absolutely.
one way to do it, and that's go buy the big RV and
Yeah.
make commitments that we're going to be there when we'll figure it out along the way. But we're going to learn a lot, and we're going to touch a lot of people. But it's 50-50. It's therapeutic for us too. Uh,
Oh,
everybody,
man.
every it's
Absolutely.
as a matter of fact, it's the only thing that's therapeutic for me is doing what I'm doing now. But next year we'll have a better idea, and the year after that, I mean, I
Yeah.
see it. I see it blowing up. Um, I wish there wasn't a need for it, but I don't think the need is
Yeah.
going away anytime soon. So I want to be part of it. I'm proud to be part of it, and I just kind of want to put my arm around some of these guys that are going through what we've been through, and say, hey, there's another side to it. You can get through it, and and I got your back.
Yeah, and there has to be another side. That's the thing. And one day I was talking to somebody about the tour, about the RV kind of flying down the interstate. I said, Seth's going to be with me, and my wife for that matter as well, will be in the RV. Then I got to thinking of all the other kids and moms that are going to be in the RV with us. Tyler will be in there. All the other moms and dads I've met in on all those Facebook chat rooms you and I are in, and the pictures, all those kids are going to be with us in this RV. And so we may run out of gas, but we're never going to run out of inspiration. We may run out of money, but we're never going to run out of passion. And those are things that I'm not worried about. I'm not worried about me getting run down or you or running into issues of motivation. The things that could be the barriers would be obviously the financial and things like that. But again, if we do this correctly with intention and we're clear about what we're doing with the proceeds, it's going into my nonprofit. I'm recusing myself from any activity in the nonprofit. I'm a financial advisor, so I understand fiduciary responsibility. So I'm not going to be involved in that. And I'm also not going to be involved in distribution of the funds as well. We're going to be giving half the money back to the state partners. But if this goes well and each stop becomes a fundraiser for a good cause and we're giving back a chunk of money to the place where we're there fundraising, I can't think of downside. I can't think of negative things that can come out of this tour. It may trigger people, but those people are going to get triggered anyway when they watch the news or see a report on overdose or suicide. I'm not overly worried about that because I do think, as I said earlier, about the opposite of addiction and substance abuse is connection. I think if we can engage and connect with other humans, like you and I are doing right now, I think that is the bridge between awareness and initiation is connection. So we can be aware of all these problems and we may know how to maybe implement these down the road, but we have to have that bridge. And I think that comes from interaction with other humans. And so the panel discussion is going to be great. Um, I think the networking afterwards, where you and I can sit there and talk to other Kens, other Jeffs, other Steve Grants. I mean, I've got so many great people for you to meet, Ken, that I met on this journey you haven't met yet that you have to meet because they'll change your life. And people that follow my show and watch my podcast and are going to be watching the tour, we want to turn that spotlight on those people, and and give them an opportunity to share their story on our platform so more people can say, hey, you know what? I'm just like Ken. I'm just like Jeff. I'm just like Steve. I'm just like Tyler. I'm just like Seth. I'm no different than any of these people. And maybe that makes people feel a little bit better when they know that there's a togetherness in this whole thing. And that's the ultimate goal of the tour, is to bring us all together. Where it's going, what we're going to build out of this, how some of the minor details, I'm just not worried about them. I'm just not, like you said. I believe if we do the right thing with good intentions, that everything will take care of itself. You know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think once we get going, and the team that you have around you at this point, I think we're up for it. Any challenges that come up, we're going to figure out a way through. I mean, we've figured out our way through much harder things. We can certainly
Yeah. Good point.
navigate
Very good
through,
point.
some logistical issues. That's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, that's a really good way you just framed it, and it's a good way to kind of put a bow tie on the show. Is that we've been through whatever's the worst that's going to happen on the tour. Barring obviously something catastrophic, but I mean, whatever is the worst that's going to happen, flat tires, hit a deer, whatever, be late to a presentation, pales in comparison to what you and I have gone through, and thousands and thousands and maybe millions of other parents have had to deal with. Certainly millions if you go back in time, but I think it's 700 Americans die a day of overdose, suicide, and alcoholism. 700 a day. Almost, it's like 770, so it's almost 800 a day. So think of the families that affects across the board, the ripple effect or the collateral damage. I mean, look what Tyler's death did in your family and what it did in Seth's death in my family and in my wife dying in her family. And some of that brought people together. Some of it separated families forever. I mean, I have brothers that don't speak to each other, never will. So it's unfortunate that, unfortunately, sometimes this stuff gets worse, but it doesn't have to. But hey, listen, it's been an hour, man. It's been a fast hour. Really enjoyed the conversation with you. Wanted to thank you again for reaching out to us. Continue your advocacy to raise awareness on these poisonings, and also help people to change the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. So, Ken, how can people reach you on social media, or if someone has a question and wants to reach out to you and talk to you, what are some good ways to reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn under Ken Graham. Also on Facebook under Ken Graham. You can look me up, um, and I can post later. I'll be happy to post my cell number if someone needs to talk or wants to ask me a question. I'm fine with that. I also have an email address. It's Ken at livingundeterred.com. But last
And we'll
thing,
have everything when, yeah.
I like the name of the RV because that's what life's about. It's endurance because the storms are going to hit, right? It,
Yeah.
we gotta go into those storms with a plan to get to the other side, and hopefully show some other people that, how to do it along the way. It's not
Yeah,
easy,
I just thought
but
that
if
fits.
we can do
And
it,
then they just found a ship 100 years after it sank, and it's just right before we go on tour, and it's like what a perfect, storyline to the RV, symbolizing the undeterred, the endurance mindset. Because that's really what you and I and everybody that's been through anything traumatic. It doesn't have to be a death of a child. You need to be undeterred, and you need to have endurance. So,
it's a
hey, with that,
leadership it's a
thank you
leadership
very
book.
much, my friend, and
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
we'll certainly continue this journey together. So, keep living undeterred. Appreciate our friendship.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.